Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you here today. We're excited because we're back into the series Crafted. And so we started it. We took a week off last week, but it's been a great series. And the reality is this, is that we've all been designed for a purpose. So today we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 3. And also want to kind of fill you in a little bit about DJ and Danae, our executive pastor. As many of you already know, maybe if you're a guest with us today, our executive pastor DJ, his little boy got bit by a dog a couple weeks ago. And so they took him down to Salt Lake City. It's pretty traumatic. And but they're doing well, and he's healing up well, and he's going to probably come back on Friday. And I just want to thank you as a church this morning for all your love and support and your prayers. I know that they're feeling it. And so, again, just want to encourage you to continue to support them. This is a long haul. This isn't something that's just going to go away really quick. And so if you can continue to pray for that family, the girls, and Beckett, obviously, and just emotionally. And so we're just thankful for them. We love them and want to continue to encourage them. So if you can send them a Facebook message or whatever, if you have their email or text or something, we'd love for them just to get some encouragement from you. That would be amazing. I love sports. Okay, anybody else love sports here? Okay, I'm a little sports lover here, okay? Not everybody's a sports lover, that's okay. But in sports, there's a lot of superstition depending on like what sport. A lot of times, like baseball, there's a lot of superstition, like when people turn around their hats backwards, rally caps, and there's a lot of different things. Like some people don't wear their underwear or don't wash their underwear for like 10 days because it's like lucky underwear. You know what I'm saying? Stuff like that. And so there's also curses, So there's curses, especially in Major League Baseball. I don't know if you guys ever heard of the Billy Goat curse. Has anybody heard of that? Familiar with that? In 1945, a guy by the name of Bill Sionis, he went to the World Series when the Cubs were playing, and he brought his pet Billy Goat to the game. All right, totally weird. And so obviously people there were pretty frustrated because the goat stunk, and so they asked him to leave. And as he left, he put a curse on the Cubs because he was so frustrated. And so they didn't win for years and years the World Series. It had nothing to do with the fact that they weren't very good, okay? But they did not win until last year when they won the World Series and the curse was broken for all you Cubs fans out there, okay? We also have the curse of the great Bambino. Do you guys know that? Babe Ruth, okay? We went from playing at the Boston Red Sox, and he went to the New York Yankees. And for years and years, the Red Sox never won a World Series, and they blamed it on Babe Ruth. It was the curse of the great Bambino. And then you also have the Madden curse, John Madden football. You guys ever heard of this one? Where most of the people they put on the cover of John Madden, the football game, the video game, usually when they're on the cover the following year, they either do horrible or they break a bone or something, and they just have a horrible season, right? Now, I don't know what you think about that. I don't know if you think it's silly or funny or whatever you think about it. It's great. But the reality is today, we're going to talk about a curse that is real. One that's affected each one of us for years and years and years. Something that we all experience. And so we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 3 today. And as I began to studying kind of the last part of the chapter, I realized I was speaking on this topic we decided several months ago. But then when I started studying it a couple weeks ago, I'm like, it's kind of bummed because I'm thinking like Adam and Eve sinned. They get consequences. There's this curse. I'm like, yeah, this is going to be a real hopeful, encouraging message. I'm like, yay, this is going to be exciting. And so I was honestly, just a little bit bummed about it. And then I began to read it. And I began to study it. And when I began to study it, being a Christian for years and years and years, there were things that I had never seen before that gave me hope and gave me encouragement. And I believe will also give it to you as well today. But in the process, we also understand that there were consequences for their sin. Adam and Eve sinned, and so therefore, there were consequences for their sin as well. There was this boy, he lived in the country with his parents, and on the farm, they had this outhouse, okay? And he hated the outhouse. It was smelly, it was stinky. In the summer, it was hot. In the winter, it was cold. And so this outhouse resided next to the river, kind of close to their house. And one day, he got an idea that he was going to push the outhouse into the river because he hated it so much, and so he did it. He pushed the outhouse into the river. And later on that evening, his dad walked into the house. He said, boy, I want you to meet you out by the woodshed. Get out there right now. And so the son was like freaking out because he knew what this meant. He knew that it was going to mean punishment. So as he began to go, he asked his dad, he said, Dad, what's this about? Like, why are we going to the woodshed? And his dad was like, well, son, somebody pushed the outhouse into the river, and I think that somebody was you. Is it? And the boy's like, yes, Dad, it was me. But he's like, Dad, I also want you to remember when George Washington cut down the cherry tree, and because he told the truth, he didn't get in trouble? And the dad was like, yeah, that's correct, son. But his dad wasn't in the cherry tree when he cut it down. That was one of those you have to wait a second or two to get the response from. Sin has consequences. Our actions have consequences. I've heard this over and over, years and years. People ask, why is there evil in this world? Why is there suffering? Why is there hurt? Why is there pain? Why do bad things happen to good people? And the reality is that we can trace it all the way back to the choices and the decisions of our first parents, Adam and Eve, at the fall. So Genesis chapter 3, we're going to look at it today. But here's the big thought for us. I want us to get this today because I think it's twofold. We need to learn from the past, but we need to live for the future. If you're taking notes this morning, we need to learn from the past, but live for the future. We need to look back. And we need to remember what happened in the past because it encourages us sometimes. But sometimes it drives us, it directs us, it teaches us, and it helps us to go on the right path. But we have to be careful that we don't stay there too long because there's also more for us in the future. So it's twofold today. I want us to look at what do we learn from the past according to this passage today. What does God have for us in the past? So we're going to pick up in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 14. And the first thought we're going to learn from the past is this. Snakes are a reminder. Kind of a weird point. Snakes are a reminder of our sin and our pain and our hurt. So kind of a refresher. Adam and Eve. They're told not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You can do anything you want, but eat of that tree. And then the serpent comes along in the form of Satan, in the form of a serpent comes along. He says, oh, you can do it. It's not a big deal. And so the woman's like, okay. And so she goes and talks to her husband. And she encourages him to start and partake of the fruit. And so they do. And as soon as they take of the fruit, they realize what they had done. And all of a sudden they realize that they're naked. And they feel shame. And they feel regret. God comes onto the scene and he says, Adam, where are you guys at? And he's like, well, we're naked. We're shameful. We're scared. And so what happens is we're going to pick up today after God comes on the scene. And he begins to talk to the snake or the serpent, who's Satan. He talks to Adam and he talks to Eve. And this is his response to what they had just done. Starts with verse 14 as he begins to talk to the snake. Then the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all of the animals, domestic and wild. You will crawl on your belly, groveling in the dust as long as you live. Now, snakes are not my favorite animal, okay? To be fair, this could have just as easily, God could have said a cat. They're pretty much the same, right? Snakes and cat, right? Actually, some translations use the word cat. The Hebrew, I think, says something about that. Can I get an amen? Anybody? Some of you guys are going to boo. You can go ahead and boo, okay, as you love cats, all right? But snakes is crazy. Before this time, people thought probably that snakes stood upright. You know, we don't know that for sure. It says that they're on their belly, but thought they were kind of upright animals. All I can picture is the Geico gecko, you know what I'm saying? And kind of walking through the garden talking with his British accent. But whatever it was, before the fall, there was some attractiveness to this animal, but after the fall, God puts this curse on this animal, and the only animal that we find in the Bible that God ever curses. Now, the rest of the animals, cows and birds and fish, they all feel the effects of the fall, but this is the only animal that was actually cursed by God. It was just interesting. If you're coaching a little league baseball team or something, don't name your team some kind of sports thing, all right? The only team, I was thinking about this, the only team that you could find in Major League Baseball, I think, is the Arizona Diamondbacks. They happen to win one game, all right? But not typically a good idea, right? Because there's a cursing on it. Why would God do this? And why would God curse this snake? I think it's because he gave us a permanent reminder of what sin and Satan can do. You see, Satan, he was so high up. He was the anointed angel. He was the chief musician. He was loved by God, but he chose to try to usurp God's authority and put himself in the place of God. And so the snake stands for a reminder of us. when we don't put God in his proper place of who he is. He's holy and he's righteous and he's so big that when we forget who he is, we too can suffer the consequences. And this is what happens. So the first thing we learn from the past is the snakes are a reminder. Here's the second thing we learn from this story is that our joy is diminished. Because of the past, our joy is diminished. So God gets done talking to the serpent, and he turns to the woman, and he turns to the man, and he begins to tell them what is going to happen because of their choices. And we see this in verse 16. Then he said to the woman, he said, I will sharpen the pain of your pregnancy, and in your pain you will give birth, and you will desire to control your husband, but he will rule over you. Now, ladies, I'm not sure if you know this, but having babies are hard, okay? I know this from personal experience. Actually, I have no clue, right? But it's hard, and it's suffering. Now, there's a lot of joy in it, right? But the joy can be diminished because of the pain. And then it goes on the second part of that verse, and it talks about the women trying to control the guys, and the guys ruling over there. And I'm not even going to get into that, but here's what I want you to know. This is where the battle of the sexes began, all right, from the very beginning. And you look at our marriages, and marriages can be amazing and awesome, but sometimes they're hard, and we struggle. And we can trace this all the way back to the very beginning when Adam and Eve, our parents, they made this choice to sin. And then God goes on to Adam, and he says this to Adam. He says, since you listened to your wife and you ate from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat, the ground is cursed because of you. All of your life you will struggle to scratch a living from it. It will grow thorns and thistles for you, though you will eat of its grains. By the sweat of your brow you will have food to eat until you return to the ground from which you were made, for you were made from dust, and dust you will return. First of all, guys, it's usually wise for us to listen to our wives, okay? After 19 years of marriage, 90 or 95% of the time, our wives are right, and we just need to listen. That's just a good principle in life to live by, but it's never good to listen to anyone, including our wives, if they go against what God says and what God has for us. And because Adam did this, God said, you're going to suffer. You're going to work. I'm still going to provide for you. You're still going to have nourishment, but there's going to be work, and you're going to have to sweat, and it's going to be painful at times, and the joy in work will be diminished because of your choice. Then he goes on and talks about the ultimate curse, life itself. Adam and Eve, they experienced life in a way that we haven't experienced, to live forever physically and spiritually, but when they made this choice, God says, look, you will go back to the dust from which you were created, and death is no respecter of people. And because of this, we see the consequences of their choice and this difficulty. And pain is there, and our joy is diminished because of what they did. Now, I think it's important for us to stop for a moment and to learn and to realize what happens when we put other people, we put other things in the place of God. But if we're not careful, we could also live there. When God has something so much greater for us, and in the midst of this chaos, and in the midst of this curse, God plants so much hope. He gives us hope in the life of the chaos. And so what I want to do for the next few moments is I want to look and not just learning from the past, but living for the future. I love this quote by Willie Jolly. He says this, the past is a place of reference. It's not a place of residence. We learn from the past, but we don't live there. We move on. When I began in ministry for the very first few years of my ministry life, I was a worship leader, which meant I sang and I led worship much like Trev did today. I would do that, and I was a decent singer. I could play a few instruments. But I thought if I was going to be a great worship leader, I had to do a couple things. First of all, I had to be able to write songs like Chris Tomlin and write songs like Hillsongs. And I also thought that I had to wear skinny jeans and a V-neck t-shirt, okay? All right, but the problem is that I do not look good in skinny jeans, and nobody wants to see that, okay? So that was out. And so I thought, okay, maybe I could write music. And so I remember just hours and hours spinning at the piano. This is before I had kids, and I would just be there, and I'd try to write music, and I would just work and work and work, and I just had a tough time with it. I actually wrote a song for my wife for our wedding. Do you want to hear it? It goes like this. When a man loves a woman. I'm just kidding. That's not it. Okay. I'm not going to sing it to you. You know why? Because it was horrible. It was horrible. And it was bad. And I was so frustrated. I was frustrated that I wanted to be this person and I wanted to do this thing. But God had not given me that ability. But eventually, I realized that I had other gifts and strengths. I was able to lead people, and I was able to build teams and organize different things. And when I realized that God had given me the hope in that, I stopped looking at my past weaknesses and my struggles and the things that I couldn't do. I stopped wallowing in that because God had something greater for me in the future. And some of you, you're in that same place. You're sitting there, you're living life, and you're looking at your past. You're looking at your hurts. You're looking at your struggles. You're looking at your weaknesses. You're looking at what you can't do in the past or what you tried and you failed at, but you're missing out on what God has for your future. And it might be right in front of you. So what I want to do just for a moment is I want to kind of dissect the rest of this passage, because we see the past, we see the hurt, we see the fall, but it's amazing. And when I began to study this, it began to just pop in my eyes. And from the very beginning, God has given us something to live for and something to hope for. So a couple thoughts. We see the future, and first of all, God's promises. If you're taking notes, we see the future in God's promises. I want you to look at verse 15. So God talks to Satan, verse 14, as a serpent. And he says, I'm going to curse you, Satan. You're going to walk on your belly for the rest of your life, and you're going to eat dirt. But that wasn't it. That wasn't it. He says this in verse 15. He says, and I will cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. Now, the very first few times I read this and before I studied this, I was scratching my head and like, what in the world is God talking about here? What does it mean that he's going to strike your head and you're going to strike his heel? This is really cool. Theologians say this is the proto-evangelium. Proto means the prototype. It's the first. Evangelium means the gospel, the good news. This is the first time that we see in the Bible where God presents the gospel, the good news, that one day he promises someone who's going to come and is going to free us from our fall, free us from our sin, free us from our burdens. And right there in the midst of the curse, hope lies. And he gives us promises. Now, what's cool about this, he goes on and he says that this woman and you, your offspring, will be going at it. There will be hostility. What does that mean? Well, the woman here initially refers to Eve. The meaning of Eve's name is the giver of life. And as you study the lineage of Eve, as it goes on down through the ages, eventually we get to this woman whose name is Mary. Now check this out. This word, it says offspring, but many versions use the word seed. That comes from a woman's seed, which is interesting because as you study the Bible, there's no other places that it talks about a woman's seed. It usually talks about a man's seed. Why? Because one day there's going to come a woman who's going to give birth to a son, and she's going to be a virgin. Isn't that cool? And God right here is planting hope in the midst of this hardness and this difficulty. And then he says to Satan, not only that, Satan, but this man, he's going to strike you in the head, and you're going to strike him in his heel. What does that mean? Basically, God was saying, look, Satan, you're going to nip at the heel of Jesus like a little puppy dog. You're going to hurt him. You're going to inflict some pain. You're going to bruise him. Just as Isaiah says that he was bruised for our transgressions, and the iniquities of us all. Yes, Satan, you will get to Jesus. But ultimately, Jesus is going to win the final victory at the cross when he steps on you, on your head, and you are destroyed forever. Can you see this beautiful picture within this verse here? And as I begin to study this, what's even cooler is that Snakes, serpents, they usually have their venom where? In their heads. And God is saying, look, Satan, you are going to be crushed at the source of your destruction, at the source of your head. And from the very, very beginning, God is planting this seed of hope, the very first gospel, and say, yes, there's a curse, and yes, you have consequences for what you have done, but I am providing a way out. So we see the future in God's promises, but he doesn't stop there in this passage. We also see the future in God's plan. We see the future in God's plan. Now, I want to kind of set this up for you a little bit. Adam and Eve sin, right? And then what do? After they realize they're naked, they try to cover themselves up with fig leaves, okay? All right, have you guys ever seen the show Naked and Afraid? If you have, don't admit it because it'd be awkward right now. But on that show, they go out there and they drop people naked in the wilderness, and they don't show a lot of stuff, but it's still kind of crazy. And then they take leaves and they cover themselves up. And all I can think of is that is not very permanent, okay? It's not going to work for very long. And so that's what Adam and Eve did. They sinned. And on their own, they try to cover up themselves, their shame. And this is what God did in verse 22. And the Lord God, he made clothing from animal skins for Adam and his wife. Now, if you're not careful, we'll read over that. We won't think much about it, like, oh, that was nice, God. Thanks for giving them something to wear. But it's bigger than that. This is the first death in the Bible. The first place where there was a sacrifice. And God, looking at Adam and Eve, realized that on their own, they were not going to be able to cover up their shame. So in his love and his grace and in his kindness, he provided a covering for them. We do this a lot, don't we, as human beings? Because of our sin and our issue, and we all have it, right? We're a church that is messy. We all have problems. None of us have it all figured out. None of us are perfect. We all have issues. But because of that, often we'll try to fix it on our own. We'll be nice people. We'll go to church. We'll give money. We'll serve. We'll help people out in the community. And we'll try to do these things. And they're all good. And they're things that we ought to do as Christians. But the reality is it's never enough. And in God's grace and his mercy, he gives us a way out. Not just a promise of a Savior, but he starts a plan, a sacrificial system to provide sacrifices for us. And we see it throughout the Old Testament, right? So throughout the Old Testament, what do? They take animals and they sacrifice them and they shed the blood to pay temporarily for their sins. Hebrews 9:22 says, for without blood there's no remission for our sins. But when they do that, what is it doing? It's pointing to the ultimate sacrifice to come, who is Jesus. I love this. And you begin to see the promises, and you begin to see the plan of God and this hope in the midst of this chaos, in the midst of this curse. It's a beautiful picture of how much God loves each one of us. So we look back to the past, we learn, we remember, but we don't stay there. We listen to God's hope, and we live for the future. And now we're sitting here today. In the meantime, we have the hope. We know that we have the hope in God and the future, but it feels like there's still something missing. Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 8. I want to read this last passage, and I love this verse. Paul says this: against its will, all creation was subjected to God's curse. Okay, just I want you to get this. Paul is saying this, because of what Adam and Eve did, we all affect the fall. We're all affected by the fall. We all are affected by sin's curse. Every single day, not just us, but the entire world. And what that should tell us is that because of our choices, it also affects others around us as well. Then he goes on and says, but, I love this, but with eager hope, the creation looks forward to the day when it will join God's children in glorious freedom from death and decay. For we know that all creation has been groaning in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. And we, believers, also groan even though we have the Holy Spirit within us as a foretaste of future glory, for we long for our bodies to be released from sin and suffering. There's so much hope in this verse because we still live in our flesh. We still live in this world that's fallen. But God, as believers, when we put our faith and we put our trust in Jesus Christ, He's given us the Holy Spirit, and we have a taste of glory to come. But until then, there is this groaning in us, a desire for something more. Now, technology is amazing. How many of you guys are video gamers here? You love some video games, okay? Like, technology and video games today, they're just crazy. Like, they have the Xbox One, and they probably have other ones as well, but this Xbox One, I guess it can talk to you. Like, you can talk to it, and you can say, hey, take me to my Twitter feed, or hey, I want to watch TV, or hey, make me dinner, or something like that. It does crazy things like that, right? And if you get tired of playing the same game, you don't have to, like, go out and buy a game. You can, like, download a game. But back in the day, you know what I'm saying? Back when I was a kid, we didn't have it so good, all right? That's kind of like we talk about video games. Our parents talked about walking in 3 feet of snow going, right? So it's rough, but we were so much different. We had these things, okay? I don't know if you remember this. You guys remember this? Now, if you're 20 years or younger, guys, this is a Nintendo, okay? And we would have these things. They were called game cartridges, all right? This is how we rolled back in the day. I remember in middle school staying up all night, and it was amazing, okay? And when somebody talked about downloading something from the cloud, we would have had no clue what we were talking about. We would have thought you're talking about real clouds, okay? But these had these controllers, and they were plugged into it. They were hardwired, and you had like a four-foot leash. I mean, it was rough times, guys. It was rough for us. And I remember staying up like all night playing video games with my friend Billy. And so we would stay up all night and play Mario Brothers. You guys remember that? Super Mario Brothers. This game actually has Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt, and Track Meet. I mean, these are classic games. Like, this is old school. And so I remember playing it, and every once in a while, you know, the game would start to glitch. Do you guys remember that? And it would go a little crazy. And normally he's jumping over mushrooms, and the flowers are throwing, you know, fire at him and stuff. But the game would start to glitch and get all pixelated, and Mario would turn purple like he's on acid. Do you guys remember that, okay? And so what you would do, there was only one way to fix it. You guys remember, all right? I'm already seeing this, right? You would take it out of the game, and then you would blow on it, and then you'd stick it back in and pray that it would work, right? We did that. I am not even kidding you. That is how we did it back then, all right? Now, you might be saying, what does it have to do with anything? I forgot, actually. No. I really did for a second. Okay. This is what it has to do. We just got done reading in Genesis and in Romans that there's a glitch in the system, right? That our world is corrupt. There's problems. It is polluted. And because of this, there's tornadoes, and there's cancer, and there's sickness, and there's hurt, and there's pain, and there's sorrow, and it is horrible. But the Bible tells us that one day God is coming back, and He's going to take the game out of the system, and He's going to blow on it, and then He's going to put it back into the Nintendo, and it's going to reset everything, and it's going to be put back right. You know what I'm saying? He's going to take Control, Alt, Delete, and He's going to reset it all back to the way that it's supposed to be. But in the meantime, there's this groaning. There's this groaning, a desire for more. And nothing in this world, nothing can satisfy it. There's this hole inside of us. And you know what that hole is? It's for and it's from God. He has placed this hole in this desire. You see, we were meant to walk with God just as Adam walked in the garden before he sinned. And then sin came and it separated man from God. And ever since, there's been this groaning and this desire to have a relationship with God. And oftentimes we misdiagnose it. we mistreat it. You know, when we eat something, we eat food, oftentimes they say we're not actually hungry. They say it's because we're thirsty. And one of the signs of dehydration, one of the symptoms, is that we have hunger pains. And so what we do is instead of going to get a glass of water, we go get a bag of Doritos or Wheat Thins, which are the Christian Doritos, okay? And instead of getting a glass of water, because we misdiagnose the problem. We do that so often. And what people do, they have this hole inside of them, and they try to do things. They try to buy things. They look to entertainment. They sleep with people. They snort things. They do drugs. They do everything else. But what were they made for? This groaning and this desire for God and for himself. And there will be nothing that satisfies this groaning except for Jesus. And right from the very beginning, 3 chapters in, right after man messed it all up, like one verse, God steps in and says, okay, hold on. I know it's all messed up now, but I love you so much that I'm going to provide a way out for you right now. And God, in his grace and his sovereignty and his mercy, he gave us what we needed. And what's amazing is when we put our faith and our trust and our hope in him, because he's our hope, not only do we get to spend eternity with him in heaven forever and ever, but he begins to heal us now of our hurts and our pains and our sorrows and our suffering. And as we go through those pains and in that sorrow, he begins to walk alongside of us just as he did with Adam in the garden. He begins to love us. Because why? Because we can now have a relationship because Jesus has come. And he did crush the head of Satan. And his blood was spilled for us because God promised it. So today, this is my challenge for us all. Let's look back at the past. It's good to look back for a moment and remember and to learn. Allow it to drive us, to instruct us, to teach us. But let's don't stay there too long. Let's live in the hope that we have in the future of God's promises and his plan for our life. So I don't know where you're at this morning. We're all on different levels. Maybe some of you need to give your life to Christ today. You've never given your life to Jesus, and you just need to submit today and say, God, I surrender to you. I give you my life right now. You can do that in just a moment. We're going to be singing some songs, and right where you sit, you can just pray a prayer and say, God, I'm a sinner, and I need you, and I give you my life today. I surrender my life to you. You surrender your life to God. You can do that this morning. Others of us, maybe we're struggling with some stuff, some hurts, some past things. Maybe it's in the present. We're dealing with some issues. We just need to give it up to the Lord today. So this is what we're going to do. In a moment, we're going to receive communion together. And if you're new with us, this is what communion is. It's just remembering. It goes along with what we're talking about today. It's remembering what Jesus did for us when he died on the cross, when his blood was spilled. That's why we drink the juice, to remember. It's a symbol of it. And then we take the bread because it's remembrance of his body being broken for us on the cross, when God planned it thousands of years before that. And we take it to remember what Christ did for us. And it's a time of worship and reflection. And what we're going to do is reflect for a moment. And then we also look forward. We celebrate the fact that Christ is coming back someday, and he's going to take the video game out, and he's going to blow on it, and he's going to make everything new. So this is what I'd like to do for a moment. These guys are going to play for a minute, and I'm going to put a couple things up on the screen here. In your handout, there's a couple bullet points. I want you to, just for a second, I want you to write down 2 things that God has done for you in the past in your blanks. If you don't have a handout, just write it on your phone, write it on your hand, write it on your wife's arm. Either way, it doesn't matter. Just do something this morning. Write down 2 things that God has done for you in the past. But also write down 2 things that God has promised for you in the future. And as Trev and Amanda play, what I would love for you to do is just take a moment. If you need to pray, maybe there's some sin in your life you need to give up and confess. And then when Trev starts to sing this morning, they're going to begin to pass out the elements of communion. You can take it. There's double stacked cups. The bread is on the bottom cup, and the juice is on top. Just grab it. And any time during the song, feel free, when you're ready, to partake of that. And just spend some time with God and just thank him and pray and worship him this morning. So let's do that.